Assessing impacts on Indigenous rights. Fighting for the recognition of Aboriginal treaty rights and for the protection of those rights continues to be a hard-fought struggle for Indigenous nations across Canada.
For our part, I think that what comes from that is that we feel like that we have done our best to protect the land, because as stewards of the land, that's our birthright, is to steward the lands and to try and take care of the lands. And even though we have been deprived of doing that for many years, it's still at the core of our belief system.
New federal requirements have the potential to give Indigenous nations a greater role when it comes to assessing the impacts of major projects on Aboriginal and treaty rights.
One of the most exciting things from a practitioner's perspective about the new Act is that for the first time, the federal government requires a proper assessment of rights impacts. This is a sea change in the way that rights impacts are going to be considered. They were considered very much in an ad hoc fashion previously. In the past, the government was primarily responsible for conducting that rights impact assessment. Now the government has promised that it will focus on the nation-to-nation relationship during that impact assessment. The parties that signed a treaty should be the ones talking about the rights impact of a project. So that's an important step as well.
An Indigenous-led rights impact assessment can provide the opportunity to build a holistic picture of the impacts a major project may have on your nation's rights and territory and what can be done to address those impacts. Within the government's new legislation and policy framework for assessing impacts to rights, there is opportunity for Indigenous nations to co-develop an Indigenous rights assessment, achieve greater transparency and clarity about a project's impacts on rights, bring an Indigenous perspective into the assessment of impacts to rights, and better inform dialogue about measures needed to accommodate impacts.
To me, Aboriginal rights is protecting my way of life. Like I said earlier, our connections to the land, the rights that we enjoy, whether it be cultural, language, hunting, fishing, gathering. You know, it is protected under Section 35, but are they being fully protected?
This new opportunity to lead and collaborate with the federal government in a rights impact assessment represents a major change from the past. But to be prepared to lead a rights impact assessment, nations need to start developing their own rights assessment protocols before a major project is even proposed in their territories to ensure that the nation's own requirements can be clearly communicated to both government and project proponents at the time an assessment begins.
Now, it's still going to be incumbent on the communities to define those rights, take control over the rights impact assessment process. And in order to do that, you need to have a plan in place and you have to have funds in place and as early as possible in the process. But there's a lot of potential there. I don't think that I'm overestimating when I say that it's an entire new branch of the impact assessment. Anyone that thinks that under the new Federal Impact Assessment Act, rights impact assessment is going to add 2 or 3 or 4% more work or effort required is fooling themselves. This is an entire new branch of the impact assessment.
If your nation is prepared, then its voice will have maximum impact on the project throughout the process. For more information, go to our website to watch more videos in this series and download the Coalition's new guide to effective Indigenous involvement in federal impact assessment. Please feel free to contact us at any time. The Coalition is here to help.